The candles flickered in the grand ballroom of Thornberry Hall, their golden light reflecting off crystal chandeliers and silk gowns, but Lady Caroline Ashworth saw none of it. She stood frozen near the refreshment table, the blood draining from her face as Lady Beatrice Cartwright's voice carried across the assembled guests with cruel precision. 26 years old and still unmarried, Lady Beatrice announced to her circle of tittering companions, each word carefully calculated to wound. Poor Lady Caroline, such a pity. No fortune to speak of, no particular beauty, and now. She paused for dramatic effect, her fan snapping open with a decisive crack. No prospects whatsoever. I do wonder why she continues to attend these gatherings. Surely even she must realize that no gentleman will offer for her now. The women around Lady Beatrice dissolved into barely suppressed laughter, their eyes darting toward Caroline with a mixture of pity and malicious satisfaction. Caroline felt the familiar burn of humiliation rise in her chest, threatening to choke her. This was not the first time she had been the subject of society's mockery, but never before had it been so public, so deliberately cruel. It was Christmas Eve, 1815. While the rest of London celebrated with joy and festive cheer, Caroline Ashworth was being reminded, yet again, that she was society's unwanted spinster, a cautionary tale whispered about in drawing rooms, a woman who had somehow failed at the one thing expected of her, securing a husband. But what none of them knew, what no one in that glittering ballroom could possibly have imagined, was that across the room, partially obscured by shadows and the press of guests, stood Adrian Thornbridge, the 5th Duke of Ravensmore, and he had heard every single word. More importantly, he had been watching Lady Caroline Ashworth all evening, and he had already made his decision. To understand how Caroline Ashworth had arrived at this particular moment of public humiliation, one must understand the series of misfortunes that had shaped her life. She had been born Lady Caroline Ashworth, 3rd daughter of the late Earl of Ashworth, a man of impeccable lineage but unfortunate financial acumen. When Caroline was 17, her father had made a series of disastrous investments in merchant ventures that never returned from the East Indies. Within a year, he was dead from apoplexy brought on by stress, and the Ashworth family found themselves in genteel poverty. Caroline's 2 elder sisters had already married respectably, one to a baronet, the other to a wealthy merchant's son. But Caroline, still in the schoolroom when disaster struck, found her prospects dramatically altered. The modest dowry her father had set aside for her was consumed by debts. The Ashworth townhouse in London was sold. Her mother, the Dowager Countess, retreated to a small cottage in Hampshire, subsisting on a widow's jointure that allowed for survival but little else. Caroline might have followed her mother into obscurity, but her eldest sister, Lydia, now Lady Pemberton, had taken pity on her. For the past 8 years, Caroline had lived with the Pembertons, serving as a companion to Lydia and a maiden aunt to her 4 children. It was a comfortable enough existence. Lydia was kind, and her husband, Sir George Pemberton, was a decent man who did not begrudge Caroline her place in his household. But charity, no matter how kindly given, was still charity, and society never let Caroline forget it. She had come out properly at 18, before the extent of her family's ruin was fully known. She had received attention from several gentlemen that first season, and had even believed herself on the verge of an offer from a younger son of a marquis. But when the truth of her circumstances became known, no dowry, no independent income, nothing but her name and her needlework skills, the interested gentleman had evaporated like morning mist. By 20, she was considered on the shelf. By 23, she was quietly referred to as a spinster. Now, at 26, she was regarded as a curiosity, a woman who had somehow failed to secure even the most modest of marriages. The truth, which Caroline herself barely acknowledged even in her most private moments, was that she had been proposed to, twice. The first offer had come from Sir George's elderly uncle, a man of 68 with gout and a reputation for cruelty to servants. The second had been from a widower with 6 children and debts that rivaled her father's. Both times, Caroline had declined, choosing uncertain spinsterhood over certain misery. Her sister Lydia had been understanding, even supportive, but society was less forgiving. A woman who refused offers, no matter how unsuitable, was considered proud, difficult, ungrateful. Whispers followed Caroline through ballrooms and drawing rooms. She thinks herself too good for honest offers. Pride is a luxury she cannot afford. She will die a lonely old maid, and it will be her own fault. Tonight's ball at Thornberry Hall was meant to be the highlight of the Christmas season. Lady Thornberry, the Duke of Ravensmore's mother, was known for her magnificent entertainments, and an invitation to her Christmas Eve ball was coveted throughout the town. Lydia had been thrilled to receive their invitation, and had insisted that Caroline accompany her. "You must come," Lydia had urged, her round face bright with sisterly affection. "Who knows? This might be the year everything changes. Christmas is a time for miracles, after all." Caroline had smiled and agreed, though she harbored no such hopes. She was 26, penniless and plain. Miracles, she had long ago concluded, were for other people. She had dressed carefully for the ball, in a gown of deep forest green that Lydia's modiste had altered from one of last season's creations. Her chestnut hair, her one claim to beauty, was arranged in a simple but elegant style, threaded with ribbon that matched her dress. She wore her mother's pearl earrings, the only jewelry she possessed. She looked, she thought critically in the mirror, respectable, unremarkable, invisible, which was exactly how she preferred it. Better to fade into the background than to invite scrutiny and the inevitable comparison to younger, prettier, richer girls. But tonight, invisibility had failed her. Lady Beatrice Cartwright, a woman Caroline barely knew, had decided to make her the evening's entertainment. And Caroline, who had endured 8 years of subtle slights and quiet dismissals, found herself the subject of very public mockery. As for the Duke of Ravensmore, he was a figure of mystery and speculation throughout society. Adrian Thornbridge had inherited his title at the age of 21, when his father died in a hunting accident. Now 32, he was one of the wealthiest men in England, with vast estates in Northumberland, Yorkshire, and Kent, a London townhouse in Grosvenor Square, and investments in shipping, mining, and railways that had multiplied his already considerable fortune. He was also one of the most feared men in society. Not feared in the sense of physical danger. The Duke was reputed to be an excellent shot and a skilled horseman, but he had never fought a duel or engaged in brawling. No, he was feared for his cold intelligence, his ruthless business acumen, and his absolute refusal to suffer fools or forgive slights. He had ruined men who crossed him in business. He had destroyed reputations with a few well-chosen words. He moved through society like a winter storm, powerful, unpredictable, and potentially devastating. Physically, he was striking rather than handsome. Tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a powerful build that suggested physical strength despite his aristocratic breeding. His hair was black as midnight, usually kept slightly longer than fashion dictated. His eyes were a startling pale gray, almost silver, that seemed to see through pretense and artifice to the truth beneath. A thin scar ran from his left temple to his cheekbone, a souvenir from the same hunting accident that had killed his father. That scar, combined with his harsh features and cold demeanor, gave him an air of danger that most young ladies found terrifying. He attended society functions out of duty, danced when required, conversed when necessary, but always with an air of barely concealed impatience. He had been pursued by ambitious mothers and scheming debutantes for over a decade, and had avoided every trap with ruthless efficiency. At 32, he showed no sign of marrying, and society had begun to whisper that perhaps he never would. Some said he had a broken heart, a lost love who had died young. Others claimed he was simply too cold, too hard, to ever truly care for another person. A few brave souls suggested he preferred his horses and his hounds to human company. The truth, as Adrian himself would have been the first to admit, was somewhat more complicated. He was not heartless. He simply found most of society shallow, tedious, and fundamentally dishonest. He valued intelligence, integrity, and competence. He had little patience for the games of courtship, the simpering compliance expected from well-bred young ladies, or the mercenary calculations of mothers seeking to secure his fortune for their daughters. He had watched Caroline Ashworth for 3 years now, Ever since he had attended a small dinner party at the Pembertons' home and observed her quiet intelligence during a discussion of agricultural reform. While others at the table had offered platitudes or changed the subject, Caroline had asked insightful questions about crop rotation and tenant welfare. Her sister had tried to quiet her. Such topics were not appropriate for ladies, but Adrian had been intrigued. He had made subtle inquiries. He learned of her circumstances, her refusal of unsuitable offers, her quiet dignity despite her reduced situation. He had observed her at various social functions, always from a distance, noting how she endured slights with grace, how she found joy in small things. A beautiful piece of music, an interesting book, a kindness shown to someone in need. She was, he had concluded, precisely the sort of woman he could respect, possibly even admired. And tonight, hearing Lady Beatrice's cruel mockery, watching Caroline's face pale with humiliation but her spine straighten with quiet courage, he had made a decision that would shock society and change both their lives forever. The moment seemed to stretch into eternity. Caroline stood frozen, Lady Beatrice's words echoing in her ears, aware of every eye in the ballroom turning toward her with varying degrees of pity, amusement, or malicious satisfaction. She wanted to flee. Every instinct screamed at her to gather what remained of her dignity and escape to the safety of the retiring room, or better yet, to find Lydia and beg to leave immediately. But Caroline Ashworth had endured 8 years of society's slights, and she had learned one crucial lesson: never show weakness. So instead of fleeing, she lifted her chin. Her hands, she was grateful to note, were steady as she set down her cup of punch. She would walk across this ballroom with her head high. She would not run. She would not cry. She would not give them the satisfaction. She had taken precisely 3 steps when a voice, deep and cold as a winter river, cut through the buzzing conversation. Lady Beatrice. The ballroom fell silent with astonishing speed. Caroline stopped mid-step, her heart suddenly pounding for an entirely different reason. The Duke of Ravensmore was moving through the crowd with the purposeful stride of a predator. Guests parted before him like water before a ship's prow, their expressions ranging from curiosity to alarm. His pale gray eyes were fixed on Lady Beatrice with an intensity that made the woman visibly pale. "Your Grace," Lady Beatrice stammered, executing a hasty curtsy. Her earlier confidence had evaporated entirely. I did not realize you were nearby." Clearly, the single word carried a weight of condemnation that made several people wince. "I could not help but overhear your commentary on Lady Caroline Ashworth's unmarried state." Lady Beatrice's face flushed red, then white. Around her, her companions suddenly found urgent business elsewhere, drifting away with the speed of rats abandoning a sinking vessel. "I was merely, that is, I did not intend," Lady Beatrice floundered. "You intended precisely what you accomplished," Adrian said, his tone never rising but somehow carrying to every corner of the now silent ballroom. "Public humiliation of a lady who has done nothing to deserve your malice. Your Grace, I assure you, I meant no harm." "You meant considerable harm." Adrian's pale eyes were pitiless. "You are a cruel woman, Lady Beatrice, who takes pleasure in others' suffering. It is a character flaw I find particularly contemptible." Lady Beatrice looked as though she might faint. To be so publicly censured by the Duke of Ravensmore was social devastation. Her husband, Lord Cartwright, would be furious. Her friends would distance themselves. Her position in society was suddenly terrifyingly precarious. I apologize, Your Grace. I spoke thoughtlessly. Your apology is not owed to me." Adrian turned slightly, and for the first time, his gaze found Caroline's. She felt the impact of that look like a physical thing. His pale gray eyes, so cold when directed at Lady Beatrice, seemed to warm almost imperceptibly as they met hers. There was something in his expression, recognition, respect, and something else she could not quite name. "Lady Caroline," he said, and his voice, which had been winter-hard moments before, softened to something almost gentle. "Would you do me the honor of the next dance?" The ballroom erupted in whispers. Caroline felt dizzy. as though the floor beneath her feet had suddenly become uncertain. The Duke of Ravensmore was asking her to dance. The Duke, who danced perhaps twice an evening and only with the highest-ranking ladies or the daughters of his closest political allies. The Duke, who had just publicly humiliated Lady Beatrice Cartwright in her defense. Caroline's voice emerged as barely a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. I would be honored, Your Grace. His expression didn't change significantly, but she thought she detected the faintest hint of approval in his eyes. He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she placed hers in it. His grip was firm, warm through their gloves, and surprisingly gentle. He led her to the center of the ballroom as the orchestra, with admirable timing, struck up a waltz. Caroline's mind raced. The waltz was still considered slightly scandalous, intimate in a way that other dances were not. The gentleman actually held his partner, one hand at her waist, the other clasping her hand. They would be close enough to speak privately, to be observed by everyone while inhabiting a small bubble of relative privacy. As the music began, Adrian drew her into the dance with easy confidence. He was an excellent dancer, she realized immediately. His movements fluid despite his size, his guidance clear but never forceful. They completed one full rotation in silence before he spoke. I apologize if my intervention was unwelcome. However, I could not allow such cruelty to pass unremarked. Caroline found her voice, though it trembled slightly. It was not unwelcome, Your Grace. It was unexpected and extraordinarily kind. One dark eyebrow rose slightly. Kind? I assure you, Lady Caroline, I am rarely accused of kindness. Then perhaps society does not know you as well as they think. The words escaped before she could stop them, and she felt heat flood her cheeks. Forgive me, that was impertinent. It was honest. He guided her through a turn with effortless skill. A quality I find far more valuable than false flattery. Caroline dared to look up at him properly. His face was composed, almost stern, but there was something in his eyes, intelligence certainly, but also loneliness, pain. She could not quite identify it, but it resonated with something deep within her own guarded heart. Lady Beatrice will recover from her embarrassment, Adrian continued, though I confess I care very little whether she does. Women like her make society tiresome. You do not enjoy society functions, Your Grace? Caroline asked, then immediately regretted the question. Of course he didn't. Everyone knew the Duke of Ravensmore attended balls and dinners only out of obligation. I find most of them tedious, he admitted. Endless repetition of the same shallow conversations, the same calculated maneuvers. Everyone performs roles rather than being genuine. Yet you attend. Duty requires it. My position requires it. He paused, then added with the faintest hint of dry humor, though tonight's entertainment has proved somewhat more interesting than usual. Caroline couldn't help but smile at that, a real smile that reached her eyes. I am glad my humiliation could provide some diversion, Your Grace. That is not what I meant. His tone sharpened slightly, and his hand tightened marginally at her waist. You were not humiliated, Lady Caroline. You were attacked by a small-minded woman who mistakes cruelty for wit. There is a difference. Society would disagree with you. The words came out more bitter than she intended. According to the town, a woman of 26 who remains unmarried is either deeply flawed or impossibly proud. Lady Beatrice merely said aloud what many think. Adrian was quiet for a moment, his pale eyes studying her face with disconcerting intensity. When he spoke, his voice was low, meant only for her ears. Then society is composed of fools. A woman's value is not determined by her marital status or the size of her dowry. You are in the minority with that opinion, Your Grace. I am frequently in the minority. He guided her through another turn. It is one of the privileges of rank. I can afford to hold unpopular views. They danced in silence for a few moments, and Caroline became acutely aware of the watching eyes around them. Everyone was staring, whispering, speculating. Tomorrow, this will be the talk of every drawing room in London. Lady Caroline Ashworth, the poor spinster, dancing with the feared Duke of Ravensmore. The gossip would be relentless. As if reading her thoughts, Adrian spoke quietly. You are thinking about the gossip this will generate. It was not a question. Caroline nodded reluctantly. People will talk, Your Grace. People always talk. It is what they do. He met her eyes steadily. But I would ask you to consider something, Lady Caroline. Would you rather be mocked in silence or defended publicly? Would you rather hide from cruel judgment or stand against it with an ally? Caroline faltered. She had never thought of it in those terms before. She had always assumed her only choice was to endure silently, to make herself as small and invisible as possible to avoid attracting attention. You have courage, Adrian said, his voice surprisingly gentle. I saw it in your face when Lady Beatrice attacked you. You did not cry or flee. You stood your ground. That is worth more than any dowry or pretty face. Tears pricked Caroline's eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever looked at her the way the Duke was looking at her now, with respect, with what might almost be admiration. Thank you, she whispered. Your Grace, thank you. The waltz was ending. Adrian guided her through the final steps. Then, as the music ceased, he did something that sent another wave of shock through the assembled guests. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her gloved knuckles, his pale eyes never leaving her face. It was a gesture of courtesy, certainly, but the duration of the kiss, the intensity in his gaze, transformed it into something more. A statement, a claim, a very public declaration of regard. Lady Caroline, he said, his deep voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. It has been a genuine pleasure. I hope I may call upon you during the coming days. Caroline's heart was pounding so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. Yes, Your Grace. I am staying with my sister, Lady Pemberton, in Mount Street. I know. His mouth quivered in what might have been the ghost of a smile. I make it my business to know such things. Before she could formulate a response to that somewhat alarming statement, he bowed formally, released her hand, and walked away, leaving Caroline standing in the center of the ballroom, the focus of several hundred pairs of astonished eyes. Lydia appeared at her elbow within seconds, her face flushed with excitement. Caroline, the Duke of Ravensmore. He defended you. He danced with you. He kissed your hand. I know, Lydia, Caroline said faintly. Her legs felt unsteady, as though the waltz had been a physical ordeal rather than a 3-minute dance. Do you realize what this means? Lydia's voice was rising with each word. The Duke of Ravensmore, the most eligible man in England. He singled you out. He put Lady Beatrice in her place. Lydia, please. Caroline grasped her sister's arm. I need to sit down. They made their way to a quiet corner, Caroline acutely aware of the stares following them. Some faces showed shock, others calculation, still others poorly concealed envy. Lady Beatrice had vanished entirely, likely fleeing in humiliation. As Caroline sank into a chair, her mind spinning, she tried to process what had just occurred. The Duke of Ravensmore had defended her, had danced with her, had suggested he would call upon her. But why? She was nobody, a penniless spinster living on her sister's charity. He was one of the most powerful men in England, wealthy beyond imagining, with connections to the highest levels of government and society. What could he possibly want with her? Unless, the thought sent a chill through her, unless he pitied her. Perhaps his defense had been motivated purely by disgust at Lady Beatrice's cruelty, and his attention was simply noblesse oblige, a powerful man condescending to notice a downtrodden woman. The thought was almost more painful than the original mockery. She did not want the Duke's pity. She did not want anyone's pity. But as she touched her gloved fingers to her lips, remembering the feel of his hand at her waist, the intensity in his pale gray eyes when he looked at her, she found herself wondering, hoping, despite her better judgment, that perhaps pity was not what motivated the Duke of Ravensmore at all. The Duke of Ravensmore called upon Lady Pemberton's household in Mount Street at precisely 3 o'clock the following afternoon. Caroline had spent the morning in a state of nervous anticipation mixed with dread. Lydia had been insufferable, alternating between gleeful speculation about the Duke's intentions and frantic instructions about proper behavior when receiving such an elevated caller. "You must be charming but not forward," Lydia had instructed while directing servants to polish the drawing room's already immaculate furniture. "Intelligent but not opinionated. Grateful but not desperate." "Oh, Caroline, this could change everything." Sir George, Lydia's husband, had been more pragmatic. "The Duke is a serious man," he'd said over breakfast, his round face thoughtful. "Not given to frivolous gestures. If he's calling, he has a purpose. Best to let him state it clearly before reading too much into his attention." When Henderson, the Pembertons' butler, announced His Grace, the Duke of Ravensmore, Caroline felt her stomach perform an uncomfortable flip. She rose from the settee, her hands clasped tightly before her to hide their trembling. Adrian entered the drawing room with that same commanding presence she remembered from the ball. He was dressed formally in dark superfine and immaculate linen, his black hair slightly windswept, his pale gray eyes scanning the room before settling on her face. "Lady Pemberton," he said, bowing to Lydia. "Sir George, thank you for receiving me." Then his gaze moved to Caroline. "Lady Caroline." The way he said her name, with a subtle warmth that was absent from his greeting to the others, sent an inexplicable flutter through her chest. "Your Grace," Caroline managed, executing a curtsy that she hoped appeared graceful rather than awkward. "You honor us with your visit." "The honor is mine." Adrian's expression remained composed, but Caroline thought she detected the faintest hint of amusement in his eyes, as though he found the formal ritual of calling hours slightly absurd. They settled into the careful dance of a formal call. Tea was served. Polite inquiries about the previous evening's ball were made and answered. Lydia chattered nervously about the weather, the approaching Christmas holiday, and the latest gossip, carefully avoiding any mention of Lady Beatrice's humiliation. Sir George contributed occasional observations about politics and the price of corn. Through it all, Adrian's attention remained fixed primarily on Caroline. He asked her opinion on the topics under discussion. He listened attentively to her responses. He engaged her in actual conversation rather than the shallow pleasantries that usually characterized such calls. "I understand you are fond of reading, Lady Caroline," Adrian said after they had exhausted the topic of Christmas traditions. "I am, Your Grace," Caroline replied, surprised that he knew this detail about her. "Though I fear my tastes run to the unfashionable. I prefer history and philosophy to novels." "There is nothing wrong with intellectual rigor," Adrian said. "I confess I find most popular novels tedious." "Have you read Ferguson's essay on the history of civil society?" Caroline's eyes lit up. She had, in fact, read Ferguson twice. It was one of the few books in Sir George's library that truly engaged her mind. "I have, Your Grace." His arguments about the progression of societies from savage to civilized states are fascinating, though I confess I question some of his assumptions about the role of commerce in moral development. Adrian leaned forward slightly, genuine interest animating his usually stern features. "In what way?" And suddenly they were engaged in a real discussion about Ferguson's theories, about Adam Smith's response, about the relationship between economic development and social morality. Lydia looked bewildered, Sir George surprised but pleased. Caroline felt her nervousness dissipate as the conversation flowed naturally, ideas sparking other ideas, intellectual engagement replacing awkward formality. "You have given me much to think about," Adrian said after nearly an hour had passed. Far longer than a typical formal call. "Your analysis of the relationship between commercial values and civic virtue is more nuanced than most I have encountered." "You are too kind, Your Grace," Caroline said, though she felt a warm glow of pleasure at the compliment. "I am not kind. I am honest." Adrian rose to his feet, and the others quickly followed suit. "Lady Caroline, I wonder if you might permit me to continue our discussion. Perhaps a drive through Hyde Park tomorrow afternoon, if the weather holds." Caroline's breath caught. A drive in Hyde Park was a public declaration of interest. Everyone who mattered would see them. The gossip that had begun with last night's dance would intensify exponentially. Caroline hesitated, uncertainty warring with unexpected hope. I would be delighted, Your Grace. Excellent. I shall call for you at 3 o'clock. He bowed to Lydia and Sir George. Lady Pemberton, Sir George, thank you for your hospitality. As Henderson showed the Duke out, Lydia erupted in barely suppressed squeals. Caroline, a drive in the park. Oh, my dear sister, I do believe the Duke is courting you. Lydia, please don't be absurd, Caroline protested, though her heart was racing. He simply wishes to continue a conversation about philosophy. No man drives a lady through Hyde Park at the fashionable hour to discuss philosophy, Sir George said dryly. Particularly not the Duke of Ravensmore. Whatever his intentions, Caroline, they are serious. You should prepare yourself for significant attention from society. Sir George's prediction proved accurate. The following afternoon, when Adrian handed Caroline up into his gleaming black phaeton behind a matched pair of greys that must have cost a fortune, half of society seemed to be watching. They proceeded at a dignified pace along Rotten Row, the fashionable promenade where the ton gathered each afternoon to see and be seen. Heads turned. Fans snapped open and shut with excitement. Whispers followed in their wake like a trailing cloak. Adrian seemed entirely unbothered by the attention. I should warn you, he said as he guided his horses with effortless skill, that by tomorrow every gossip in London will have us engaged. Caroline felt heat rise in her cheeks. Your Grace, I hope you do not feel obligated. That is, your defense last night was very kind, but you need not. Lady Caroline. He turned his head to look at her directly, his pale gray eyes serious. I do not act out of obligation. I do not feel pity. And I certainly do not engage in public courtship gestures that I do not intend. Then why? The question burst out before she could stop it. Your Grace, I am nobody. I have no fortune, no connections, nothing to recommend me. Why would you? She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his attention seemingly focused on his horses. When he spoke, his voice was low, meant only for her ears despite the public setting. 3 years ago, I attended a dinner party at your brother-in-law's home. It was a small gathering, political allies, nothing more. During dinner, the conversation turned to agricultural reform. Most of the ladies present looked bored or changed the subject. But you. He glanced at her, something almost like warmth in his cold eyes. You asked intelligent questions. You had clearly thought deeply about the issues. You cared about the welfare of tenant farmers, about practical solutions rather than abstract theories. Caroline remembered that dinner. She had been trying to be quiet, to fade into the background as she usually did. But the topic had engaged her deeply. She had not realized the Duke had noticed. I made inquiries about you, Adrian continued. I learned of your circumstances, your father's financial ruin, your refusal of unsuitable offers. I watched you at various social functions over the years. I saw how you endured slights with grace, how you found joy in small things. Music, books, a kindness shown to someone in need. How you never complained about your reduced circumstances or sought to use your connections for advantage. He guided the horses around a corner before continuing. You are, Lady Caroline, precisely the sort of woman I have been looking for. Intelligent, genuine, capable of substance beneath society's shallow surface. I do not care about your dowry or lack thereof. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. What I need, what I have always needed, is someone I can actually talk to. Someone real. Caroline felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever said anything like this to her. No one had ever looked past her poverty and her unmarried state to see her as a person of value. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say you will allow me to continue calling on you. Say you will give me the opportunity to get to know you better, as I hope you will come to know me. Adrian's voice softened slightly. I am not an easy man, Caroline. I am cold, demanding, impatient with foolishness. But I am honest, and I am loyal to those I care for. I believe we might suit each other well. Your Grace. Adrian, he interrupted gently. If we are to be friends, you should call me Adrian. At least when we are private. Adrian, Caroline repeated, testing the name on her tongue. Felt intimate, dangerous, thrilling. Yes, I would very much like to continue our acquaintance. The smile that crossed his face was small, barely perceptible to a casual observer, but to Caroline it felt like the sun emerging from behind clouds. Good, he said simply. They completed their circuit of the park, conversation flowing easily despite Caroline's continued awareness of watching eyes. Adrian spoke of his estates, his investments, his frustration with Parliament's inability to address pressing social issues. Caroline found herself responding honestly, sharing her own observations and opinions without the usual feminine restraint. It was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. When Adrian returned her to Mount Street, he handed her down from the phaeton with careful courtesy. But as her feet touched the pavement, he retained her hand for a moment longer than strictly necessary. Tomorrow is Christmas Day, he said. I assume you will be occupied with family celebrations, but the day after, I would like to call upon you again. If you are amenable. I am, Caroline said, her voice steadier than she felt. Very amenable. Until then, Caroline. The use of her Christian name, here on the public street where anyone might hear, sent another flutter through her chest. She curtsied, he bowed, and then he was gone, leaving her standing on the doorstep with her heart racing and her mind spinning. Over the following days and weeks, a pattern established itself. Adrian called upon the Pembertons nearly every afternoon. Sometimes he took Caroline driving. Other times they walked in the small garden behind the house, carefully chaperoned by a maid but with enough privacy for genuine conversation. Occasionally he escorted the entire Pemberton family to the theater or a concert, but his attention remained primarily focused on Caroline. He brought her books, not frivolous novels, but works of history and philosophy that he thought would interest her. They debated politics and social reform. They discussed agriculture and commerce. They argued about literature and art, sometimes with real passion, neither giving ground easily. You are impossibly stubborn, Adrian told her one afternoon after a particularly heated debate about the merits of Gothic architecture. And you are arrogant beyond bearing, Caroline retorted, then clapped her hand over her mouth in horror. Oh, I shouldn't have. But Adrian was laughing, a real laugh that transformed his usually stern face into something almost boyish. No, don't apologize. I am arrogant. It's refreshing to have someone willing to tell me so. The barriers between them were falling, slowly but steadily. Caroline learned that beneath his cold exterior, Adrian was deeply lonely. He had lost his father at a young age and assumed responsibilities that would have crushed a lesser man. His mother, while loving, was distant, more interested in society than in genuine connection. He had no siblings. His wealth and title isolated him, making genuine friendship nearly impossible. Everyone wants something from me, he confessed one gray January afternoon as they walked in the Pembertons' garden. My money, my influence, my connections. No one simply wants me. I want you, Caroline said softly, then blushed at how that sounded. I mean, I enjoy your company, your actual company. I don't care about your title or your fortune. Adrian stopped walking and turned to face her, his pale gray eyes intense. I know, he said quietly. That is why I keep returning. But not everything was easy. Society's reaction to their courtship was complex. Some approved. The Duke was wealthy enough to marry whomever he chose, and Lady Caroline, while poor, was well-born and seemingly respectable. Others were scandalized. Surely the Duke could do better than a penniless spinster? Still others were calculating, wondering how to use this unexpected development to their own advantage. Lady Beatrice Cartwright had departed London entirely, unable to face society after her public humiliation. But others stepped forward to fill the void, whispering poisonous speculations. They say she trapped him somehow, Caroline overheard at a January ball. two women behind a potted palm who did not realize she was nearby. A man like the Duke would never choose someone so plain and poor unless he was forced. Perhaps she threatened to create a scandal, the other woman suggested. Or perhaps he compromised her somehow and honor demanded he make amends. Caroline fled to the retiring room, fighting tears. When she emerged, Adrian was waiting, his expression thunderous. "I heard them," he said without preamble. "The two crows behind the palm. Ignore them, Caroline. They understand nothing." "But they believe it," Caroline whispered. "Half of society believes I entrapped you somehow. Then half of society are fools." Adrian took her hand, unconcerned with propriety or watching eyes. "Caroline, look at me." She raised her eyes to his, seeing nothing but absolute certainty in his gaze. "I choose you," he said firmly. "Not because I was trapped or compromised or forced. Because you are intelligent and genuine and brave. Because when I am with you, I feel less alone. Because you see me, not my title, not my fortune, but me. That is infinitely more valuable than any dowry or pretty face." "Adrian," Caroline breathed. "I know we have known each other only a few weeks," Adrian continued. "By society's standards, this is hasty. But I am not a patient man, Caroline, and I see no purpose in delay when I am certain of what I want." He dropped to one knee right there in the ballroom, ignoring the gasps and whispers erupting around them. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. "Caroline Ashworth, will you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife?" Time seemed to stop. Caroline was aware of every eye in the ballroom fixed upon them, of Lydia's joyful gasp from somewhere nearby, of Sir George's gruff approval. But most of all, she was aware of Adrian, this powerful, complicated, unexpectedly tender man who had seen past her poverty and her unmarried state to the person beneath. "Yes," she whispered. Then, louder, finding her voice and her courage. "Yes, Adrian, I will marry you." The ring was a sapphire surrounded by diamonds, antique and beautiful. Adrian slipped it onto her finger with careful reverence, then rose and pulled her into his arms, kissing her forehead with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with tears. The ballroom erupted in applause and exclamations. Within minutes, they were surrounded by well-wishers, some genuine, others clearly calculating how this development affected their own social standing. But Caroline barely noticed. She was focused on Adrian, on the warmth in his eyes, on the way his hand remained firmly clasped around hers, as though he would never let go. Later that night, as Lydia helped her undress, her sister kept exclaiming over the ring, over the romance of the proposal, over Caroline's sudden elevation from spinster to Duchess-to-be. But as Caroline lay in bed, staring at the sapphire glinting in the moonlight, she thought about what Adrian had said. "Because when I am with you, I feel less alone." She understood that feeling. She had been lonely for so long, surrounded by people yet isolated by her circumstances. But with Adrian, she felt seen, understood, valued. It was not the romantic love of novels. It was something deeper, more real, a meeting of minds, a recognition of shared loneliness and complementary strengths. And as she drifted towards sleep, Caroline allowed herself to hope, really hope, that perhaps Christmas miracles existed after all. The announcement of the engagement appeared in the Times the following morning. By afternoon, London society had divided into distinct camps. Those who celebrated the Duke's choice, those who questioned it, and those who actively worked to undermine it. The leader of the latter group was the Dowager Duchess of Ravensmore, Adrian's mother. Lady Thornberry was a formidable woman of 55, still beautiful despite her years, with the same pale gray eyes as her son but none of his capacity for warmth. She was a leader of society, a woman whose approval could make or break a débutante's season, whose dinner invitations were coveted by the highest ranks of the town. She had very definite ideas about who should become the next Duchess of Ravensmore. And Caroline Ashworth was decidedly not that person. 3 days after the engagement announcement, Adrian brought Caroline to meet his mother at the Ravensmore townhouse in Grosvenor Square. Caroline dressed with particular care, knowing the importance of this meeting. She wore her best day dress, actually one of Lydia's, altered to fit, and Adrian's sapphire ring. The Dowager Duchess received them in her private sitting room, a space decorated with such opulent magnificence that Caroline felt immediately out of place. The Dowager herself sat in a throne-like chair, her silver hair arranged in an elaborate style, her gown of purple silk more suited to an evening entertainment than an afternoon call. "Adrian," she said, offering her cheek for her son's dutiful kiss. Then her eyes, cold as winter ice, fixed on Caroline. "And this is Lady Caroline Ashworth." It was not a question, and the emphasis on Lady Caroline Ashworth, with all its implications of Caroline's lower status compared to a duchess, was deliberate. "Mother," Adrian said, his voice taking on that winter-hard tone Caroline had first heard at the Thornberry Ball. "May I present my betrothed, Lady Caroline? Caroline, my mother, the Dowager Duchess of Ravensmore." Caroline executed her deepest curtsy. "Your Grace, it is an honor to meet you." The Dowager's expression did not soften. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to a settee some distance from her chair. They sat, and a painful silence descended. The Dowager studied Caroline with the expression of someone examining an inferior piece of merchandise. "You are the Earl of Ashworth's daughter," the Dowager said finally. "The late Earl, whose financial imprudence is well known." Caroline felt her cheeks burn but kept her voice steady. "Yes, Your Grace. My father made unfortunate investments before his death." "Unfortunate." The Dowager's laugh was devoid of humor, an interesting euphemism for reckless foolishness that left his family in near poverty. "And you are how old, Lady Caroline?" 26, Your Grace. 26 and unmarried." The Dowager's tone made it sound like a moral failing. "One must wonder why." "Mother," Adrian interrupted, his voice dangerous. "This interrogation is necessary." The Dowager cut him off. "You may be the Duke, Adrian, but I am still your mother, and I will not stand silent while you make a catastrophic error." "Caroline is not an error," Adrian said coldly. "She is my choice, and my choice is final. Your choice is rushed, ill-considered, and frankly baffling." The Dowager turned her icy gaze on Caroline. "Tell me, Lady Caroline, what exactly do you bring to this marriage? No fortune, no powerful connections, no particular beauty or accomplishment. You are 26, firmly on the shelf, living on your sister's charity. What, precisely, makes you suitable to be the Duchess of Ravensmore?" The words were calculated to wound, and they found their mark. Caroline felt as though she had been struck. Every insecurity, every doubt she harbored about her worthiness for Adrian's regard, came flooding back. "I," Caroline's voice faltered. "I bring myself, Your Grace. My intelligence, my character, Your character?" The Dowager's eyebrows rose. "What do we know of your character? You have spent 8 years living as a dependent in your sister's household. You have refused offers from perfectly respectable gentlemen. You attend society functions despite having no prospects. Some might call that character. Others might call it pride and delusion. That is enough." Adrian rose to his feet, his face thunderous. "Mother, you will apologize to my betrothed immediately." "I will do no such thing." The Dowager also rose, facing her son without flinching. "Adrian, I am trying to protect you from a disastrous mismatch. This girl is nobody. She will embarrass you in society. She lacks the training, the connections, the bearing necessary for a duchess. You are thinking with," she paused delicately, "something other than your head. Once the initial infatuation fades, you will be left with a wife who is utterly unsuitable." And slowly, insidiously, opinion began to turn. Invitations that had been arriving daily began to slow to a trickle. Ladies who had been friendly to Caroline at various functions now looked through her as though she did not exist. Whispers followed her wherever she went. "She's using him for his money. The Dowager is right. She's utterly unsuitable. Poor Duke. He'll regret this match within a year." Caroline tried to bear it with dignity, but each slight, each whispered comment, each cold shoulder, accumulated like stones in a pack on her back. She began to wonder if the Dowager was right. Perhaps she was unsuitable. Perhaps Adrian would come to regret his choice. Adrian, for his part, was furious. He confronted his mother repeatedly, demanding she cease her campaign. He publicly defended Caroline at every opportunity. He made it clear to all who would listen that anyone who slighted his betrothed would face his displeasure. But even his fierce defense could not entirely stem the tide of disapproval. And Caroline, watching Adrian fight battle after battle on her behalf, felt guilt begin to corrode her happiness. "Perhaps we should delay the wedding," she said quietly one afternoon as they sat in the Pembertons' drawing room. Lydia had tactfully withdrawn, giving them privacy. "Give society time to adjust to the idea. Give your mother time to—" "No." Adrian's response was immediate and emphatic. "Caroline, that is exactly what they want. Delay becomes indefinite postponement. Postponement becomes cancellation. I will not give my mother or society's gossips that satisfaction." "But the scandal," Caroline protested. "Adrian, your mother won't even attend. People are saying terrible things. I'm damaging your reputation, your standing." "You are not damaging anything," Adrian interrupted firmly. He moved from his chair to sit beside her on the settee, taking both her hands in his. "Caroline, look at me." She raised her eyes to his, seeing frustration but also determination in his pale gray gaze. "My mother is a snob of the highest order," Adrian said bluntly. "She cares more about appearances and social standing than about actual worth. Society follows her lead because she is powerful, not because she is right. But I do not care what they think, Caroline. I care about you." "You care now," Caroline said, her voice breaking slightly. "But what about in a year? 5 years? When you're attending functions where half of society cuts me dead? When your political allies distance themselves because your Duchess is unsuitable? When your mother refuses to acknowledge your children because of who their mother is?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his hands tightening around hers. When he spoke, his voice was softer, almost gentle. "Do you want to end our engagement, Caroline?" The question hit her like a physical blow. No, of course not. But I want you to be happy, Adrian. I want you to have the life you deserve, not one marred by scandal and social disapproval because of me." "The life I deserve," Adrian repeated slowly. "Let me tell you about the life I deserve, Caroline. Before I met you, I attended society functions out of obligation, enduring hours of shallow conversation and calculated maneuvers. I was lonely, surrounded by people who wanted my money or my influence but never me. I had no one I could truly talk to, no one who saw past my title to the man beneath." He cupped her face with one hand, his thumb brushing her cheek with unexpected tenderness. "Then you appeared. Brave, intelligent, genuine you. Suddenly I had someone to talk to, someone who challenged me, someone who made me laugh. For the first time in years, I was not lonely. That is the life I deserve, Caroline. A life with you. Everything else is noise." "But your mother will come around or she won't," Adrian said firmly. "I am sorry she is being cruel. I am furious with her behavior. But Caroline, I am a grown man of 32. I have managed vast estates, navigated complex business dealings, and survived political machinations that would have destroyed lesser men. I do not need my mother's approval to marry the woman I love." Caroline's breath caught. "The woman you—" "Adrian, did you just say that I love you?" Adrian smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Yes, I did. I know we have not known each other for long. I know this began as something practical, two lonely people finding unexpected companionship. But somewhere along the way it became more. You became essential to me, Caroline. You became the person I think about first when I wake and last before I sleep. You became the measure by which I judge all others. You became my love." Tears were streaming down Caroline's face now. "I love you too," she whispered. "So much it frightens me. I never thought I would feel this way. I never thought anyone would see value in me. But you do, and it's everything." Adrian kissed her then, a proper kiss, deep and passionate and claiming. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, He rested his forehead against hers. "We will weather this storm," he said quietly. "Together. My mother's disapproval, society's gossip, all of it. We will face it together. Because that is what partnerships do. That is what love does. It endures." "Together," Caroline agreed, finding her courage again. "Yes, Adrian. Together." But even as she spoke the words, even as she felt the warmth of Adrian's embrace and the certainty of his love, a small part of her wondered if love alone would be enough to overcome the obstacles arrayed against them. The answer came sooner than she anticipated. 2 weeks before their planned wedding date, Caroline attended a ladies' tea hosted by one of Lydia's friends. She had not wanted to go. These gatherings had become trials rather than pleasures. But Lydia had insisted she could not hide forever. The tea began normally enough. Polite conversation about the weather, upcoming social events, the latest fashions from Paris. But then Lady Thornberry herself entered, her presence commanding immediate attention. The Dowager made a show of greeting the other ladies, pointedly ignoring Caroline entirely. Then, as everyone settled with their tea, Lady Thornberry began to speak. "I feel I must share some information that has recently come to my attention," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the drawing room. "Information that concerns us all, as it relates to the suitability of certain individuals to move in our society." Caroline felt her blood run cold. She knew, with terrible certainty, that she was about to be publicly destroyed. "Lady Caroline Ashworth," the Dowager continued, her ice-cold eyes finally fixing on Caroline, "has been presented as a young woman of genteel poverty but of good character. However, I have learned that there is more to her story than she has chosen to reveal." "Your Grace," Caroline said, rising to her feet, her voice shaking but determined, "I have hidden nothing. My circumstances are well known." "Are they?" The Dowager's smile was cruel. "Tell me, Lady Caroline, did you inform my son that you were not living with your sister purely out of familial affection? Did you mention that you are, in fact, paid a salary to serve as companion to Lady Pemberton? That you are, essentially, an employee in her household?" Shocked gasps rippled through the room. Caroline felt the ground seem to shift beneath her feet. "That is, it is true that Sir George provides me with a small allowance," Caroline admitted, her cheeks burning with humiliation, "for pin money to purchase small necessities. But I am not an employee. I am Lydia's sister." "A sister who is paid," Lady Thornberry pressed. "How convenient. And this small detail you neglected to mention to my son? One might call that deception, Lady Caroline. One might suggest you deliberately misrepresented your circumstances to trap a wealthy duke into marriage." "That is not true." Caroline's voice rose, but she could see the doubt in the faces around her. The Dowager had chosen her weapon carefully. The idea that Caroline was essentially a paid companion, little better than a servant, and had hidden this from Adrian, it was devastating to her credibility. "I have also learned," the Dowager continued relentlessly, "that you have been refusing offers of marriage for years, not because the gentlemen were unsuitable, but because you were waiting, calculating, hoping for a better catch. And what better catch than the wealthiest duke in England?" "Stop," Caroline said, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Please, Your Grace, stop." "Why should I stop? My son is about to make the greatest mistake of his life, and it is my duty as his mother to prevent it." The Dowager rose to her feet, her presence dominating the room. "Lady Caroline Ashworth is not what she pretends to be. She is a schemer, a fortune hunter, a woman who has deliberately concealed her true circumstances to entrap my son. I call upon all of you as witnesses to this truth." Caroline stood frozen, the weight of accusation and judgment crushing her. Around the room, faces reflected shock, speculation, and in some cases, satisfied vindication. Even Lydia's friend, the hostess, looked uncertain now. "I..." Caroline tried to speak, but no words came. What could she say? The Dowager had taken facts, the small allowance from Sir George, her refusal of previous offers, and twisted them into something sordid and calculating. And the worst part was that Caroline could see how believable the narrative was. A poor spinster, desperate and cunning, targeting the wealthy Duke of Ravensmoor. It fits society's expectations perfectly. Without another word, Caroline turned and fled from the drawing room. She heard Lydia calling after her, but she did not stop. She needed to get away, to hide, to escape the judgment and the whispers and the terrible, creeping certainty that perhaps the Dowager was right. Perhaps she had been foolish to believe she could ever be suitable to be Adrian's Duchess. Perhaps their love, as real as it felt, was not enough to overcome the vast gulf of circumstance between them. Perhaps it would be better, kinder to Adrian, if she simply disappeared. Caroline did not return to the Pemberton townhouse. Instead, she walked blindly through London streets, barely conscious of direction or danger. Eventually, she found herself in a small church, empty and quiet, where she collapsed into a pew and finally allowed herself to weep. How had everything fallen apart so quickly? Just weeks ago, she had been hopeful for the first time in years. Adrian had seen value in her, had chosen her, had loved her. And now his mother had systematically destroyed any credibility she might have possessed. The worst part was not the Dowager's accusations themselves, but the grain of truth within them. She had accepted a small allowance from Sir George, though it was meant for personal expenses, not wages. She had refused previous offers, though it was because those men were cruel or desperate, not because she was waiting for someone richer. But truth and perception were different things. And the Dowager had shaped perception masterfully. "I should end the engagement," Caroline whispered into the empty church. "I should leave London, go to my mother in Hampshire, disappear. Let Adrian find someone suitable, someone who won't damage his standing or cause scandal." The thought was agony, but she forced herself to consider it seriously. Wasn't love sometimes about sacrifice? About choosing the other person's welfare over your own happiness? She was still sitting in the pew, tears drying on her cheeks, when she heard footsteps on the stone floor. She looked up, expecting to see a priest or perhaps another refugee from society's demands. Instead, she saw Adrian. He stood in the aisle, still in his greatcoat, his dark hair disheveled as though he had been running. His pale gray eyes scanned the church until they found her, and then he was moving toward her with determined strides. "Adrian," Caroline breathed, rising hastily to her feet. "How did you—" "Lydia sent word," he said, reaching her side. "She told me what my mother did, what she said." His hands cupped her face, tilting it up so he could see her tear-stained cheeks. His expression was thunderous. "Caroline, I am so sorry. I should have anticipated this. I should have protected you better." "It's not your fault," Caroline said, fresh tears spilling over. "Your mother was right, Adrian. I am unsuitable. I have been fooling myself, fooling both of us. You should marry someone appropriate, someone who won't cause scandal." "Stop!" The word was not loud, but it carried absolute command. "Caroline, look at me." She did, seeing fury in his eyes, but not directed at her. "My mother," Adrian said, his voice cold with rage, "is a manipulative, cruel woman who values social standing above all else. She has spent her life cultivating influence and controlling others. She cannot bear that I have chosen a wife based on actual affection rather than political calculation." "But what she said," Caroline protested, "about the allowance, about my refusing offers, was twisted truth designed to wound you and undermine our engagement." Adrian's thumbs brushed away her tears with gentle insistence. "Yes, Sir George provides you with pin money. That is what decent families do for relatives who have fallen on hard times. It does not make you an employee. Yes, you refused unsuitable offers. That makes you wise, not scheming." "Society believes her version," Caroline said miserably. "By tomorrow everyone will know. They'll say I trapped you, deceived you. Then they can say it to my face, and I will respond accordingly." Adrian's expression was fierce. "Caroline, I do not care what society thinks. I care what you think. I care what we think. Do you believe you trapped me?" "No," Caroline admitted. "But, do you believe you deceived me about anything substantial?" "No, but—" "Then that is all that matters." Adrian pulled her into his arms, holding her close. Caroline, listen to me very carefully. I have spent the past 3 hours dealing with my mother. I have told her, in terms that left no room for misunderstanding, that her behavior is unacceptable, that she has a choice. She can accept our marriage with grace, or she can find herself completely cut off from my life. No visits, no financial support beyond her legal jointure, no access to her future grandchildren. Caroline pulled back slightly to look up at him in shock. Adrian, you can't. She's your mother. She is a woman who just publicly humiliated the person I love, Adrian said flatly. That is unforgivable. She made her choice, Caroline. Now she faces the consequences. What did she say? Caroline asked hesitantly. A grim smile crossed Adrian's face. She did not believe I would follow through on my threat. She told me I would change my mind, that I would realize she was right about you. I informed her that she has 1 week to publicly apologize to you and retract her accusations. If she does not, she will never see me again. Adrian, that's too harsh, Caroline protested, even as part of her heart swelled at his fierce defense. She's your mother. You can't cut her out of your life entirely. Watch me. Adrian's expression softened slightly as he looked down at her. Caroline, I told you before, I am not a patient man. I am not diplomatic. When someone threatens what matters to me, I respond decisively. You matter to me more than anything else in the world. More than my mother's approval, more than society's opinion, more than my own comfort. You are everything. Caroline felt fresh tears spill, but these were different, tears of overwhelming emotion rather than despair. I love you, she whispered, so much, but I'm terrified, Adrian. Terrified of failing you, of not being enough, of... You are already more than enough, Adrian interrupted gently. Caroline, do you know what I see when I look at you? I see a woman who has faced loss and hardship with grace, who has maintained her integrity despite poverty, who has refused to compromise her values even when it would have been easier, who is intelligent and brave and genuine in a world full of shallow artifice. That is the woman I love. That is the woman I have chosen to spend my life with. He released her briefly to reach into his coat pocket, withdrawing a folded piece of paper. I stopped at the Times on my way here. I have purchased space for an announcement that will run tomorrow morning. Caroline took the paper with trembling hands and read. The Duke of Ravensmore wishes to make the following statement public. Malicious rumors have circulated regarding his betrothed, Lady Caroline Ashworth. The Duke wishes to state unequivocally that these rumors are false, cruel, and beneath the dignity of response. Lady Caroline is a woman of exemplary character, intelligence, and virtue. The Duke considers himself extraordinarily fortunate to have secured her affection and has never for a moment doubted her worthiness to be his Duchess. He trusts that all persons of honor and good sense will join him in condemning those who spread vicious gossip and in celebrating a union based on genuine regard and affection. The wedding will proceed as planned on March 15th at St. George's Church, Hanover Square. All persons of goodwill are welcome to attend and witness the Duke's great happiness. Caroline read the words twice, then a third time, her heart swelling with each pass. Adrian, this will cause talk. Good. Adrian's smile was fierce. Let them talk. Let them see that I stand with you, completely and without reservation. Let them understand that anyone who slights you slights me. I am done with subtlety, Caroline. I am making it clear to all of London that you are under my protection, that I choose you, that I will defend you against anyone, including my own mother. Your mother will be furious, Caroline said, though she could not suppress a smile. My mother has been given a choice. If she is wise, she will apologize and attend our wedding with grace. If she is not, Adrian shrugged, then she will face the consequences of her actions. I am not a child she can bully into compliance, Caroline. I am the Duke of Ravensmore, and I make my own choices. Caroline folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her reticule. Then she threw her arms around Adrian's neck and kissed him with all the love and gratitude and relief flooding through her. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Adrian smiled. A real, unguarded smile that transformed his usually stern face. "I am going to take that as approval of my methods," he said dryly. "Wholehearted approval," Caroline confirmed. Then, more seriously, "Thank you, Adrian, for believing in me, for defending me, for everything." "You need not thank me for being decent," Adrian replied, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Though I confess I am enjoying the gratitude kisses. Perhaps I should defend you more often." Caroline laughed, a genuine laugh that felt like sunshine after a storm. "You are impossible." "I am in love," Adrian corrected. "There is a difference." He offered his arm. "Come, let us return to the Pembertons. Lydia is worried sick, and we have wedding plans to finalize. I am thinking of a very public, very grand ceremony. The kind that leaves no doubt in anyone's mind about my devotion to my Duchess-to-be." As they left the church, Caroline felt the weight that had been crushing her begin to lift. Yes, society would gossip. Yes, some would continue to disapprove. Yes, the Dowager Duchess might remain hostile. But she had Adrian's love, his support, his fierce protection, and somehow that made everything else manageable. The announcement appeared in the Times the following morning, exactly as Adrian had written it. The response was immediate and polarizing. Some applauded the Duke's public defense of his betrothed. Others muttered about unseemly displays and questioned his judgment. The Dowager Duchess reportedly took to her bed with vapors. But the tide of opinion began to shift. Adrian's statement, so unequivocal and public, made it difficult for the gossips to maintain their narrative. After all, if the Duke himself declared Lady Caroline to be of exemplary character, who were they to question his judgment? More importantly, Adrian followed words with actions. He appeared everywhere with Caroline on his arm, making it clear through his attentiveness and devotion that this was no marriage of convenience or entrapment, but a genuine love match. They attended the theater together, sitting close in the Duke's box, his hand covering hers on the armrest in full view of society. They rode through Hyde Park at the fashionable hour, Adrian's attention focused entirely on Caroline despite the dozens of onlookers. They walked together in Bond Street, Adrian carrying her purchases himself rather than handing them to a servant, treating her with a tender regard that shocked those accustomed to his usual cold formality. "The Duke is besotted," Lady Jersey declared at one society gathering, her tone a mixture of surprise and approval. "I confess I never thought to see him so human." Others began to follow Lady Jersey's lead. If the Duke of Ravensmore, that cold, exacting man, could show such obvious devotion to Lady Caroline, perhaps there was more to her than they had realized. Perhaps the Dowager had been wrong in her assessment. 5 days after the public confrontation at the tea, a letter arrived at the Pemberton townhouse, addressed to Caroline in an elegant hand. Caroline opened it with trembling fingers, recognizing the seal of the Dowager Duchess. "Lady Caroline," it read, "I have been advised by my son that I must either apologize for my recent comments or face permanent estrangement. While I maintain that my concerns about your suitability were not without foundation, I acknowledge that my expression of those concerns was perhaps more harsh than necessary. I also acknowledge that my son has made his choice, and it is not my place to undermine his decision. Therefore, I offer you this apology. I regret any distress my words may have caused you. I hope we can move forward in a spirit of civility, if not warmth. I will attend your wedding to my son. Yours, Catherine Thornbridge, Dowager Duchess of Ravensmore." Caroline read the letter twice, then showed it to Adrian when he called that afternoon. "It is not the most gracious apology ever written," Adrian observed dryly. "But it is an apology nonetheless. The question is, Caroline, can you accept it?" Caroline considered carefully. The Dowager had been cruel, yes. Her campaign against Caroline had been devastating. But the letter represented a step toward reconciliation, and Caroline knew that completely severing Adrian's relationship with his mother would cause him pain, no matter how justified. "I can accept it," Caroline said slowly. "Not because the apology is effusive or because I believe she truly thinks she was wrong, but because maintaining this conflict will hurt you, Adrian. and I will not be the cause of pain between you and your mother if there is any way to avoid it. Adrian pulled her into his arms, his embrace warm and solid. You are far more generous than she deserves, he murmured into her hair. But I am grateful for your compassion. And I promise you, Caroline, if she ever treats you with such disrespect again, there will be no second chance. Understood, Caroline said, nestling closer. Though I confess I hope we can find some way to coexist peacefully. I do not need her love or approval, but I would prefer not to live in constant conflict with my husband's mother. A reasonable hope, Adrian agreed. We shall see if she is capable of meeting it. The wedding of the Duke of Ravensmore and Lady Caroline Ashworth took place on March 15, 1816, at St. George's Church in Hanover Square, and was by all accounts the event of the season. The church was filled to capacity. Political allies, business associates, and society figures crowded the pews, curious to witness the culmination of what had become London's most discussed romance. Outside, crowds gathered to catch a glimpse of the bride and the notoriously private Duke. Caroline wore a gown of ivory silk, simple but elegant, with Brussels lace at the cuffs and hem. Her chestnut hair was arranged in an elegant style, threaded with pearls and orange blossoms. She wore Adrian's sapphire engagement ring and carried a bouquet of white roses and lily of the valley. As she walked down the aisle on Sir George's arm, she saw familiar faces in the pews. Lydia weeping joyfully, her mother, the Dowager Countess of Ashworth, who had made the journey from Hampshire looking both proud and overwhelmed. Several ladies who had befriended Caroline over the past weeks, drawn by her gentle nature and impressed by the Duke's obvious devotion. And there, in the front pew, sat the Dowager Duchess of Ravensmore. She was dressed magnificently in silver silk, her expression neutral but her presence itself a statement. She had come. She had kept her word. It was a beginning, if not yet a reconciliation. But Caroline's attention was drawn inexorably to the man waiting for her at the altar. Adrian stood tall and imposing in formal attire, his black hair neatly arranged, his cravat tied with military precision. But it was his face that made Caroline's breath catch. The usually stern features were softened by an expression of such tender warmth that it transformed him entirely. As she reached his side, he took her hand, his grip firm and sure. "You are beautiful," he murmured, his voice pitched low for her ears alone. "You are biased," Caroline whispered back, but she was smiling. "I am truthful," Adrian corrected. "Always." The ceremony proceeded with solemn beauty. When it came time for vows, Adrian spoke with a firmness that carried through the church, leaving no doubt about his commitment. Caroline's voice was softer but equally steady. Her gray eyes locked on Adrian's pale ones as she promised to love, honor, and cherish him for all their days. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, Adrian kissed Caroline with a tenderness that brought tears to more than one observer's eyes. This was no perfunctory peck of obligation. It was a real kiss, full of promise and devotion, the kiss of a man who had found something precious and had no intention of ever letting it go. The wedding breakfast was held at the Ravensmore townhouse, transformed for the occasion into a wonderland of flowers and candlelight. The Duke and his new Duchess moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and good wishes with grace. The Dowager Duchess approached them at one point, her expression carefully neutral. "Caroline," she said, and it was the first time she had used Caroline's Christian name. "You look very well. The role of Duchess suits you." It was hardly an effusive compliment, but coming from the Dowager, it represented significant progress. "Thank you, Your Grace," Caroline replied with genuine warmth. "I hope we can build a cordial relationship in time." Something flickered in the Dowager's cold eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at Caroline's generosity. "Perhaps we can," she said slowly. Then, to Adrian, "You have chosen a woman with more grace than I gave her credit for. Do not make me regret offering that apology, my son. Treat her well." "Always," Adrian replied firmly. As the Dowager moved away, Caroline looked up at her new husband with wonder. "Did your mother just approve of me?" "In her way," Adrian said dryly. "Do not expect warm embraces and loving confidence. But I believe she has accepted that you are now the Duchess of Ravensmore, and that she must adapt accordingly. I can work with that, Caroline said. Later that evening, as the last guests departed and the servants began clearing away the remains of the celebration, Adrian took Caroline's hand and led her upstairs to the Duchess's chambers, now her chambers. The suite was magnificent, decorated in shades of cream and gold, with tall windows overlooking the square and a massive four-poster bed draped in silk. A fire burned cheerfully in the hearth, casting warm light across the room. "This is yours now," Adrian said, watching Caroline take in her surroundings. "All of it, this house, the estates, everything I have. It is yours by right of marriage, but more importantly, it is yours because I choose to share it with you." Caroline turned to face him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I still cannot quite believe this is real, that I am your wife, that you chose me out of all the women in England." Adrian crossed the room to stand before her, his hands coming up to cup her face with infinite tenderness. "I chose you because you are the only woman I could imagine spending my life with, the only person who makes me feel less alone, the only one who sees the man behind the title." He kissed her forehead gently. "I love you, Caroline Thornbridge, Duchess of Ravensmore. I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you," Caroline whispered, "my fierce, complicated, wonderful husband." What followed was a wedding night full of tenderness and passion, of gentle discoveries and whispered promises. Adrian was patient and careful with Caroline, attentive to her comfort and pleasure. And Caroline, initially nervous, found that physical intimacy with the man she loved was not something to fear but to celebrate. Afterward, as they lay together in the massive bed, Caroline's head resting on Adrian's chest, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. Just months ago, she had been mocked at a Christmas ball, deemed unmarriageable and unwanted. Now she lay in the arms of the Duke of Ravensmore, his Duchess, his wife, his love. "What are you thinking?" Adrian asked, his deep voice rumbling under her ear. "That Christmas miracles are real," Caroline replied, "and that I am the most fortunate woman in England." Adrian's arms tightened around her. "I am the fortunate one, Caroline. Never doubt that." The months that followed brought their own adjustments and challenges. Caroline had to learn the complex duties of a duchess, managing multiple households, overseeing staff, hosting social functions, and supporting Adrian's political work. It was daunting at first, but she discovered she was more capable than she had believed. Adrian was patient with her learning curve, supportive without being overbearing. He consulted her on estate matters, valued her opinions on political issues, treated her as a true partner rather than a decorative accessory. "You have a gift for administration," he told her after watching her efficiently reorganize the household accounts. "I confess I am considering delegating more responsibilities to you." "Careful," Caroline warned with a smile. "Give me too much power and I might grow tyrannical." "I would find even a tyrannical you charming," Adrian replied, pulling her into his arms. "Though I confess I prefer you exactly as you are." The Dowager Duchess remained cordial if not warm. She visited occasionally, offering advice on managing the Ravensmore properties that was sometimes helpful and occasionally condescending. But she kept her more cutting observations to herself, apparently recognizing that Adrian had meant his threat about permanent estrangement. More importantly, she saw how her son had changed. The cold, isolated man had become warmer, more engaged with life. He smiled more freely. He laughed at Caroline's jokes. He was, in short, happy, genuinely, deeply happy in a way the Dowager had not seen since he was a boy. "You have been good for him," the Dowager admitted to Caroline during one visit, her tone grudging but sincere. "I was wrong about you." "Not entirely wrong. You did lack the training for this role. But you have risen to the challenge admirably. And more importantly, you have given my son something I could not, the capacity to love again." It was as close to a full apology as Caroline would ever receive, and she accepted it with grace. Society's opinion also shifted dramatically. The Duke and Duchess of Ravensmore became known for their devoted partnership, for the obvious affection between them that was evident at every public function. Ambitious mothers pointed to them as an example of a successful love match. Young ladies sighed over the romance of it all. The powerful duke who had fallen for a woman of no fortune because he valued her character above all else. Lady Beatrice Cartwright, who had sparked the entire situation with her cruel mockery at the Christmas ball, found herself increasingly isolated in society. The Duke of Ravensmore's influence was long and his memory longer. Invitations to important functions ceased. Her husband, furious at the social damage, restricted her access to funds and began spending more time away from home. She had learned, too late, that there were some people it was dangerous to cross. Caroline, for her part, felt only pity for Lady Beatrice. She is miserable in her marriage and lashed out at someone she perceived as weaker, Caroline told Adrian when he mentioned Lady Beatrice's declining social status. I cannot find it in myself to celebrate her downfall. You are far kinder than she deserves, Adrian replied. But your compassion is one of the reasons I love you. In the autumn of 1816, Caroline discovered she was with child. Adrian's reaction was a mixture of joy and terror. Joy at the prospect of a child, terror at the thought of Caroline going through the dangers of childbirth. You will have the finest physicians in England, he declared, already making plans. And I will be with you every moment. Adrian, you cannot be in the birthing room, Caroline protested, laughing. It simply is not done. I do not care what is done, Adrian said stubbornly. You are my wife, my love, my everything. I will not leave you to face such danger alone. In the event, when their son was born the following summer, Adrian did remain nearby, not in the birthing room itself, which even he had to admit would be too scandalous, but close enough to be summoned the moment it was safe. When Caroline's maid appeared to tell him he had a son and that both mother and child were healthy, Adrian literally ran to the Duchess's chambers. He found Caroline propped up against pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. She looked up as he entered, her face breaking into a tired but joyful smile. Adrian, meet your son, she said softly. Adrian approached almost reverently, his usually confident stride rendered cautious by the fragility of the moment. He looked down at the tiny face emerging from the blankets, dark hair like his own, but a softer version of his features, with what might become Caroline's eyes. He is perfect, Adrian whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Caroline, you are perfect. Thank you. Thank you for this gift, for surviving, for... His voice broke. Sit with us, Caroline invited, shifting slightly to make room on the bed. Adrian settled carefully beside her, one arm around her shoulders, his free hand gently touching the baby's impossibly small fingers. What shall we name him? He asked. I was thinking of William, Caroline said, after my father. And Adrian, of course, for his own father. William Adrian Thornbridge, Adrian tested the name. The future Duke of Ravensmore. He looked at Caroline, his pale gray eyes shining with unshed tears. I never imagined this, Caroline. This happiness, this completeness. You have given me everything I never knew I needed. We gave each other everything, Caroline corrected gently. You rescued me from a lifetime of loneliness and society's scorn. You saw value in me when no one else did. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. You were always lovable, Adrian said firmly. Society was simply too blind to see it. But their loss was my gain, and I will be grateful every day for their stupidity in overlooking you. Over the following years, the Duke and Duchess of Ravensmore built a life that became the envy of society. They had 3 more children, 2 daughters and another son, all raised with love and attention from both parents, an unusual arrangement in aristocratic families but typical of the Thornbridges. Caroline proved to be an excellent duchess, managing the various estates with efficiency while also engaging in extensive charitable work. She established schools for poor children on the Ravensmore estates, improved conditions for tenant farmers, and used her position to advocate for women's education. Adrian's political career flourished with Caroline's support. She became known as his most trusted advisor, and it was said that the Duke of Ravensmore consulted his Duchess on every important decision. Their partnership became legendary, a marriage of true equals who respected and valued each other's contributions. The Dowager Duchess, watching her grandchildren grow up surrounded by love and laughter, admitted privately that she had been wrong about Caroline. "You have made my son happier than I ever saw him," she told Caroline during a visit when William was 5 years old. "And you have been a better mother and duchess than I could have hoped for. I am sorry I did not see your worth immediately." "You see it now," Caroline replied gently. "That is what matters." Society, of course, continued to gossip. It was what they did. But the whispers about the Duke and Duchess of Ravensmore were no longer cruel speculation about entrapment and unsuitability. Instead, they spoke of the famous love match between the fearsome Duke and his gentle Duchess, of the partnership that had transformed them both. At Christmas balls and New Year celebrations, young debutantes would point to the Duchess of Ravensmore and whisper hopefully about finding their own Duke to love them despite lacking fortune or conventional beauty. The story of how Caroline had gone from mocked spinster to beloved Duchess became the stuff of legend, a fairy tale that society loved to tell. Years later, when Caroline was gray-haired and Adrian's dark locks were silver, they attended another Christmas ball at what was now their son William's house, William having inherited the dukedom upon Adrian's eventual retirement from most public duties. They stood together on a terrace, watching the younger generation dance and flirt and navigate society's complex rules. Caroline leaned against Adrian's solid warmth, his arms secure around her waist. "Do you remember?" Caroline asked softly. "That Christmas Eve when Lady Beatrice mocked me so publicly? I remember wanting to throttle her," Adrian replied dryly, "and realizing I could not let you face such cruelty alone." "You saved me that night," Caroline said. "You defended me when no one else would." "No," Adrian corrected gently, pulling her closer. "You saved yourself, Caroline. You stood there with your head high, refusing to flee or cry. I simply recognized your courage and decided I wanted to stand beside you." "We saved each other," Caroline insisted, echoing words they had spoken many times over their long marriage. "You gave me love and security. I gave you companionship and joy. Together we built something beautiful." "We did," Adrian agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And I would do it all again, Caroline. Every battle with my mother, every piece of malicious gossip, every social hurdle. I would face it all again for the privilege of spending my life with you." "As would I," Caroline whispered. "My fierce, wonderful Duke." Inside the ballroom, their grandchildren were dancing, carrying on the legacy of love and partnership their grandparents had established. The Ravensmore dukedom had become synonymous with happy marriage, with choosing love over convenience, with valuing character above fortune. And it had all begun on a Christmas Eve when society mocked a penniless spinster, never imagining that the most feared duke in England was watching, never imagining that he would not only defend her, but choose her, never imagining that from public humiliation would bloom one of the great love stories of their age. As Adrian held Caroline close on that cold Christmas evening, both of them gray-haired but their love as strong as ever, he murmured the words he had spoken countless times over their decades together. "I chose you then, and I choose you now, and I will choose you every day for the rest of my life. You are my Duchess, my love, my everything." And Caroline, resting her head against his shoulder, replied with the words that had become her own refrain. "And you are my miracle, my Duke, my heart. Thank you for seeing me when I thought I was invisible. Thank you for loving me when I thought I was unlovable. Thank you for choosing me." They stood together in the winter darkness, a Duke and his Duchess, a love story that had survived mockery and scandal and social disapproval to become something legendary. And if anyone had asked them the secret to their happiness, they would have answered simply, "We chose each other. Every day, through every challenge, we kept choosing each other. That is what love does. It endures, persists, it chooses." And so they did until their very last days.